Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to try to get this video done. The mic has like 10% life left, it said, so we got to charge that sucker. But as you can see, different perspective and a different day. We're trying some things. We're going to try to move the Motovlogs to a Saturday. I'm really just doing that just to see if I get some more views. You know, the channel's trying to grow. It's slowly growing, which I'm excited about. But we're doing the best we can. And the big goal today is to make the ride home safe and focus on what I need to focus on and not the camera and crash into somebody. So what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk... Get off your phone, please, lady. We are going to talk about motorcycles. Let's talk about first bikes. Guys, I've been riding since I was about 6 years old. My dad brought mini bikes home. I've been riding street bikes for the last 6 years or so, basically daily. Motorcycles are my therapy. They pulled me out of a depression. I'll talk about that in a different video. I want to try to stay on track. First things first, let's talk about a first bike. And guys, a lot of that's going to depend on you, your riding style, what you're interested in, etc., etc., etc. I believe any bike can be a good first bike. Well, basically any bike. And I believe any bike can be a bad first bike. If you are responsible enough, you can start out, and this is going to get me a lot of hate, you can start out on a leader bike. I do not recommend it. You have to be extremely responsible. You have to understand the power of the bike. But it could be done. I personally don't think there's a good place to use leader bikes. Sorry guys, people are doing weird stuff. On the street, I don't think a leader bike's a really good fit. I find sport bikes to be uncomfortable, personal, and we're going to get into that here in a minute about personal stuff. I find them to be uncomfortable. I just do. I have a really bad back. It's why I ride cruisers mostly. But I find them uncomfortable. There's nowhere to really use them. By the time you crack the throttle open on them, they basically have the same problems my VMAX has. There is nowhere on the street where that bike can do what it needs to do and not take you straight to jail. It's just is what it is with those type of bikes. I mean, most of those bikes will do 100 miles an hour in first gear just about, if not. So, a smaller bike, it's just more fun on the street, you know. Then we come into, you know, the other end of the spectrum. A Grom can be a bad first bike. It can teach you a lot of bad habits. It's so underpowered and you want to just whack it and wide open everywhere. And if you live where I live in a more rural area, it ends up not being fun. You know, my average ride for a weekend is a couple hundred miles. A couple hundred miles on a Grom is a rough day. And to put it in perspective, I will hop on this Harley and ride 600 miles in a day and be okay. You know, there were days where I'm jumping off the Grom with 150 miles on it and can barely walk the next day. So, depending on your riding style, what most people would consider a good bike could be a bad bike for you, and what most people consider a good bike or a bad bike could be a good bike for you. Again, I'm not telling you go out and buy the leader bike. That's not what I'm doing here. I personally do not recommend one as a first bike. I think in a very niche situation, we're not going to paint all super broad brushes, it could be an okay first bike. And by with that, I mean you probably won't die riding that bike as a first bike. You would never have to buy another bike. You would definitely have to grow into that one, put it in rain mode or whatever, but it's not what I'd recommend for the average person, because you're going to get excited, wheelie control's not going to work right, and You know, we're talking about a bike that's on par with most hypercars. You know, it can be very dangerous if you don't respect that power. Any motorcycle can be dangerous if you don't respect it and what you're doing. Even now, you've noticed that I've kind of been on and off. Traffic's heavier than I'd like, and I'm kind of focusing to make sure I don't end up in a bad accident. I've been clipped by a car. It's not fun. I don't want to do it again. But yeah, so what do I personally recommend for a first bike? Believe it or not, it's not a cruiser, not like what I started on. I don't recommend a cruiser bike as a first bike. I don't recommend a small CC sport bike as a first bike, or a naked bike. I recommend a dual sport. I recommend something like my KLR in the adventure bike segment, etc. The reason why is they're cheap to get, they run on any type of gas, all the drop protection is there, they're halfway designed to be dropped, so parts on them when you do drop them are not super expensive, and you can do everything that you can do with any of the other bikes. I can take this Harley and go to a twisty road and have 90% of the fun as I could if you put me on a sport bike. It's, you know, really on the street you shouldn't be going much harder than 70% anyway, because, you know, a turtle walks out in front of you and that's a crash. You need to leave yourself room to maneuver. So yeah, sorry guys, I'm just getting off of work, I'm a little tired. So yeah, I recommend that style of bike. Now, if you live in a big city and you know you're never going to do that and you want a Grom, go get a Grom. I personally think Groms are great scooter alternatives. You want something that's more like a motorcycle, but a Grom may fit your use case. Your use case may be in a big city where you're just bopping around a few blocks. In that case, the Grom would be perfect, and I'd probably still own mine. And that's a big part of it too. You know, don't let someone on the internet or someone talk you out of a bike that you want unless they have a very valid reason. If you're 6'5" and 300 pounds of muscle, you're not going to be happy on a Sportster. You know, honestly, you need to be looking at a road glide or a street glide or one of the big touring bikes if you're trying to ride to be comfortable. At that size, you're going to be okay handling the weight of the bike, and that's the biggest limiting factor for cruiser bikes, is how heavy they are. The bike I'm on, my Lowrider ST, is 700 pounds. You know, the bike, and that's a lot of weight. So pushing that around a parking lot, learning to deal with that weight as a new rider, you know, that's the limiting factor on a lot of these cruiser bikes, because a big lumpy V-twin makes gobs of torque down low and has a very linear power curve. It's not peaky. You're not gonna no power, hit 5,000 RPMs, here comes all the power, and you go from 50 horsepower to 150 horsepower in a snap of a finger. You know, that's where whiskey throttles and bad things happen. So, like I said, I recommend something like that dual sport. But if that's not what you want, I get that. You know, go look at a 500. I don't recommend a 300cc for a starter bike. I think they're too small. I think you grow out of them way too fast. I got rid of my 750 Shadow because there was no aftermarket to make it go faster. You know, and speed's not everything. Gun to my head, I can only have one bike. I'd have my KLR. I'd get rid of the VMAX, I'd get rid of this, and I'd keep my KLR. It's just too versatile. You know, and it's the slowest bike I got. So, but I would recommend a 500 or bigger for a starter bike. Honestly, I would say stay in that parallel twin or that big single cylinder category or a V-twin category, and you should be pretty good. With just about anything. And then it's just your price point and what you're looking for. Now, with that being said, don't let someone talk you out of a bike you want because of some personal reason. A great example of this is my neighbor. She loves a Sportster S. She's going to look at one. I personally hate that bike. It's the only bike from Harley that I've ever sat on and went, get me off of this, I don't like it. Which blew everybody's mind, including my own, because I like V-Rods. I liked my FX DRS. It's the one bike that if I could have any of the bikes back that I've owned over the years, that FX DRS is the one I'd want back. I like that style of bike. I got on that Sportster S, and it did not gel with me at all. It is a very pretty bike. That bike is something that you want to ride back and forth to bike nights and, you know, go show off the bike. That bike is not something you want to throw into a corner. It is, the foot pegs are in front of you, they're forwards, you got a drag bar, so you're in what I call the flying taco position. You can get mids on it. It's got a giant front tire. The front and rear tire are the same size and they're big. And it has one disc brake up front. I'm relatively sure the Pan America that is detuned, and they're going to tell me that it's retuned. That's crap. They detune that because they know the second that Pan America makes the same power as that Sportster S, that's the last Sportster S they sell. That's also the reason why that engine won't go in a Nightster. But it's got that big giant front tire, and guys, for people that don't know and don't realize, I'm not keeping this bike balanced. At low speeds I am, but right now I can lean all over the bike and it's not going to do much. The centrifugal force of the wheels spinning is what's keeping this bike up and balanced going down the road. You add a bigger wheel and a bigger tire, you have more centrifugal force. That bike's going to want to go straight down the road just fine. It is not going to want to lean over in a corner, and it's not going to transition back and forth. It just won't. It's just physics. You're going to run out of lean angle really fast on that bike. You can't do anything with the exhaust because it is molded into the body on the bike. I'm sure somebody makes something and they do stuff, but that bike is fit in. When you buy that bike, you have to be locked into that bike. Now, with that being said, my neighbor has a sport bike. She's not looking for a bike to go ripping through corners. She's looking for something to cruise on, and if she's comfortable on that bike, that may be the perfect bike for her. So who am I to tell her, you shouldn't get that bike, go get this other bike? I told her my opinion on it, but at the end of the day, I tell her the same thing I tell everyone else that's looking at motorcycles. Fuck what I'm saying, get what you want. So, in short, and we can knock this out much easier and much quicker, guys. Any bike, as I've said, can be a good bike or a bad bike. It's up to you. If I take a pickup truck and I put it on the same road course as I would a Lamborghini, it's going to make a really bad sports car. If I take that Lamborghini and I put it on the farm, it's going to make a bad pickup truck. It's not that one's better than the other. They're for different things. The same thing about motorcycles. This bike that I'm riding on, as much as I love it, would make a very bad sport bike. A sport bike will makes a very bad touring bike. And that's where I'll get into. If you go into a dealership and they're asking you the type of riding you're doing, you know, and you're like, well, I want that Gixxer 1000, but you know, I'm going to start doing 600-mile trips. You might want to look at a sport touring bike. You know, vice versa. If I go into a Harley dealership and I go, I'm ready to go off-road and cruising around, let me get this fat boy. That's I'm not going to like that bike. You know, I probably should be looking at the Pan America in that situation. So, yeah, guys, you know, don't let a salesman talk you out of a bike you want, but don't be so stuck on a bike you want that you overlook what you're going to be doing with the bike and make yourself miserable. So, guys, we are almost to my house, and I'm not trying to have this and ramble on over the same stuff over and over again. Again, at the end of the day, don't listen to someone on the internet. You know, if you think something sounds fishy or wrong, it probably is. You know, and it may not be wrong as it's wrong. It may be wrong to you. You know, so if you want to start on that leader bike, again, I recommend against it, but you're an adult. I can't stop you. I think you'll have a lot more fun on something like an MT-07 or a CB600 you know, and even that, you know, or something, anything in the parallel twin line, I think you'd have a lot of fun on. If you're looking at starting on a Harley, the Nightster's a great bike. I do really recommend you look at the Softail lineup. I think they're good bikes as well. If you want something that looks more like a Sportster and you don't want to buy a used one, the Yamaha still makes the Bolts, I believe. That is a phenomenal little bike. The Shadow 750 is a great starter bike. You know, you're spoiled for choice, guys. You're not buying bad bikes. I've never ridden a motorcycle I thought was a bad bike. I have enjoyed all of them I've owned for different reasons, and I'm sure if I got a Sportster S, I'd have a good time on it too. So, again, guys, we're coming to the end of this. I love y'all. I hope y'all know that. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. I'm sorry I got rambly again. I'll only get better. Anyway, guys, life's an adventure. Get out there and live it.